Hello and welcome to Religion and Spirituality. My name is Dr. Kevin Ross Emery and I'm here at Shamans Dream Gifts in the Fox Run Mall in Newington, New Hampshire. So I want to welcome everybody that's in the room and on Periscope. So when I start talking about any subject, I like to take a little bit and talk about my history with the subject and where I came about speaking on it. I always say that if you decided that you wanted to learn how to make a souffle and somebody that was trying to teach you how to do it, you found out had never made a souffle, you might go, and you're going to teach me how? How valid is your information? Just tell me the website you read it off of. And there are a lot of people out there that will read something on a website or read a book and then suddenly, especially in this day and age, become an instant expert. So religion and spirituality is a very interesting topic. And I actually chose it, I spoke on it down in Florida about 6 weeks ago. And what surprises me is how many people don't know that there really is a difference between religion and spirituality. They connect it as if it's the same thing. And so my history is I was actually, I was raised as a combination of Unitarian Universalist. Unitarian Universalist, I kind of call it it's the thinking man's church. In Unitarianism and Unitarian Universalism, there was really it's more about the message. It's about social consciousness. It's a church that's very strongly grounded in the fact that if something as bad is happening, if children are being sold as sex slaves in Thailand, it does hurt us. If there are women that are being abused in Chad, it does hurt us. That we are from a unified source where anything that's happening in the world that affects any aspect of humanity affects all aspects of humanity. So it's a very political church sometimes. It's a church where I always remember when I was living in Phoenix going to the UU church there, and the teenagers were running the service one week. And they gave an award to their minister because they had the coolest minister, this woman who was the minister of the church. And they gave her the award because she had been arrested at a protest, protesting the building of a wall for immigration reasons. And they just thought they had the coolest minister because their minister got thrown in jail for protesting. So it kind of gives you a little bit of an insight. Because of a split early in my family, in my childhood with my parents, I also was exposed to what I call a little bit of, holiday Christianity. I'd be dragged out for Easter, I'd be dragged out for Christmas Eve, I'd be dragged out for funerals and weddings. If I chose to want to go to church myself, to go to Sunday school, it was my choice. It was never encouraged. I went through a little period when I was, in about 7th or 8th grade, where I tried a brigade that was run by the local Baptist church. And in fact, my mother and stepfather talked to me because I wanted to make sure I was not getting involved in some kind of cult. So I always say I was not really raised with a Bible in my household, and I had some brushes. I went to Sunday school a few times to check it out. I always had a hard time that I was told not to question, that you just had to accept it. Something in my mind wasn't like, if I can't question, it means you can't be questioned, which means you've got to be hiding something. There's got to be something, because if you can't tell me the answer, you must not know the answer. Or you don't want to tell me the answer, and either way I'm suspicious. So I was probably a terror to my Sunday school teachers when I did go. I didn't go to the Unitarian Universalist Church for Sunday school. I found it as an adult, and I recommend it to some of my parents that I work with, that if they do want to have their children belong to a church, one of the things I liked about Unitarian Universalism was the fact that every year that the kids in Sunday school study every major world religion. So you are introduced to Judaism, you are introduced to paganism, you're introduced to Buddhism, you're introduced to Hinduism. You're introduced to all of these different kinds of world religions, and your job is to find out which one calls you. So from that perspective, I like the fact that what they do is they educate and let children choose. which way they want to go. So one of the things that I was brought up with is kind of having a family that, at least part of my family that was very ingrained with Unitarian Universalism, was the idea that not only does it hurt us if something happens to somebody else in some other part of the world, it is our responsibility to do something about it. That we receive gifts and talents in order to go out and do something with them. And that if you are in a better position than somebody else, you're supposed to help them. Now, there's a difference between helping somebody and enabling them, but you're supposed to help them. You're supposed to get involved, i.e. the minister that got thrown in jail for protesting the immigration stuff going on in Arizona. So you're supposed to stand up and make a difference. So, you know, I went from there to, you know, I also had a very parallel, very psychic childhood and was working as a professional psychic by the time I was 16, 17. And so I thought nothing of clearing haunted houses, doing medical intuitive, talking to dead people, you know, doing psychic readings. That was all just part of who I was. And so of course that immediately labeled me either as mentally ill or a devil worshiper in some belief systems, you know, that only the ministers and the priests were allowed to have certain gifts from God. Like God looked around and said, oh, you can't have that gift, you're a woman. Oh, you can't have that gift, you're not a priest. Oh, you can't have that gift, whatever. Like, you know, there was a picking and choosing instead of thinking, well, if one person can have that gift, why can't all people have that gift? Now, we may all have it at different levels. Some people are more creative than others. Some people have certain kinds of intelligence that are better than others. Though I love the fact that we've got into multiple intelligence now and understand that education, public education only measures one kind of intelligence, and the kind of intelligence that measures is not an overall indication of what the true intelligence is. But that's pretty recent. That's less than a decade old that they've been really starting to accept the idea that somebody can get really good grades and actually be really stupid. And somebody can get really bad grades and be really bright. You know, I did get my early degrees in business and psychology, spent 12 years in the corporate world, and then really realized that I was being called to come back and work with my gifts and my talents, work with the gifts that I had. And so I walked away from I was a sales training manager for American Express. I had an office, I had a car phone when they were the size of a small house, and you had to pack them in a little box and bring them in and out, and the secretary and the suits, and I left it all behind. And that was 26 years ago that I started my own business doing spiritual work. When I left, the message that I had clearly gotten was, it was a message that I needed to return to my roots. Well, since my grandmother had talked to me about being psychic when I was 4, and I knew that I had these gifts that people were not going to understand, I looked at that as part of what returning to my gifts were. So one of the things I did was I actually made a decision to say, okay, well, if I'm here to be a healer, if I'm here to use my natural gifts and talents, what does that look like? Well, I want to help people, and I want to help people on a profound level. I mean, being a sales training manager for American Express and their financial planning division helped people, you know, save money and resources. But you could have a talent for it, but I felt like it may not be the best utilization of all of the talents and gifts that I had. I don't put down the company nor the work I did at that time, but I just felt like I was called to do something more or different. And so I said, okay, well, I'm going to check out nursing, because at this point I'm 30 years old, I'm not going to go to med school. And I'm not a real big fan of doctors anyways, so I'm like, yeah, probably not a good choice. But I might consider nursing. And I decided I would also check out the possibility of ministerial work. And I would check out the difference, and I would check out what it would be like to just go back to being a psychic again. And, you know, now the year we're talking about it's 1990. There is a wave of more New Age stuff starting to come. But that wave is just a tiny wave in 1990. There's not a lot going on. And people certainly weren't saying to any kind of career or guidance counselor, oh, I think I want to be a holistic healer. That wasn't happening. So I decided that, so I actually did a stint at a nursing home for a little bit to see if I felt like I was called to do that. And I met with 3 different ministers to do internships with them to see if I wanted to work in any of those religions, because I wanted to be open-minded. I wanted to be open-minded, and I wanted to see what each of them had to offer and how did they minister to their population. So I did an internship with a UU minister, which was a no-brainer, because as an adult, if I went to a church, it was pretty much a UU church, a Unitarian Universalist church. I was living in Norfolk, Virginia. So that's that. You're into the deep south at Norfolk. And so I said, well, I'm going to try a Southern Baptist minister. Let's stay open. Let's see what's going on. And I decided to study with a Episcopalian. Because I was like, I can't quite do Catholicism. I just can't bring myself to go to a priest. I said, but Episcopalian, Anglican, yeah, I'll take a look at that. That will give me a feeling. It's, you know, I kind of look at it as more closer to the English version of Catholicism or the American version. So I went and I spent time with each one of those. I only ever did one session with the UU minister, and she made one thing very clear, and I said, yeah, not for me. I only went to the Episcopalian, with the Episcopalian minister one night and said, yeah, not for me. I hung out with the Baptist minister for about 6 weeks and met with him on a weekly basis because I really was trying to understand. The UU, now Unitarian Universalism is not considered a Christian religion anymore. They broke away because they're not Christian. You can be Christian and go. If you go to a Unitarian Universalist church, you'll find there's a lot of subgroups. You have your Jewish UUs, you have your pagan UUs, you have your Wiccan UUs, they've always been very strong in the gay lesbian community. So you will have that. And you have your Christian UUs. But I had gone to see this minister on Easter, and she spoke about Earth Day, and she talked about, you know, the kindness to the earth and stuff like this. But it was Easter, and she never once mentioned Christianity. Again, I wasn't raised with Christianity. You know, Easter was a holiday that you know, got to wear some great colors and got Easter eggs. You know, you get to eat some candy. You know, and if you had to get dragged through church for that, that was okay. You know, there was a reward at the end. So, and I don't mean at the end. At the end of the day, there was a reward. And I said to her afterwards, I said, you didn't mention the Christian religion at all. And she said, not in my church, not ever, never gonna happen. Now, that is not standard for UU. That was an individual minister who had an axe to grind with Christianity. But I said, well, this is who I have to study with, and I'm not studying with somebody that's got that kind of axe to grind. Because I am all about encompassing. I'm all about inclusion. So from that, I hung around with the Baptist minister because he kept on going through the church. He kept on wanting, he wanted me to start in Genesis and go through the Bible. And I was like, well, okay. Never read the book before. I think I recognize the cover. You know, we can talk a little bit. But I ask questions. You have to have faith. I ask questions. You have to have faith. You ask questions. You have to have faith. I'm like, are you saying there were really 7 24-hour days? Absolutely. Really. So, and what about this? And my intellect kept kicking in. But once a week he would meet and he'd make me this fabulous breakfast. And we'd sit and eat over breakfast. And if you're feeding me, you can get my attention for longer. But at the end of it, I was like, I don't feel enough faith to not be able to question. He said, well, this might not be right for you then. You have to feel that faith. And I realized that I had my own relationship with faith. So now we're going to kind of kick in. I'm going to take a second. Can you break and do that?
Mm-hmm.
We can only do small segments on Periscope, and then we have to start it over again. It'll just take a second. Heads up, yep. Okay, welcome back to Spirituality and Religion. My name is Dr. Kevin Ross Emery, and we're here at Shamans Dream Gifts in the Fox Run Mall in Newington, New Hampshire, and we want to welcome our Periscope people. So, I ended up, did the nursing home thing and was like, yeah, I don't think this is it. I had people begging me to start doing psychic work again. Now, I hadn't done psychic work professionally for 12 or 13 years at that point, but I had people that remembered me and wanted me to start doing it again. And I'm like, well, that's probably a pretty good sign. From that, I remembered, and we had left the last note before we took our brief break on faith, because he was saying you have to have faith, you have to have faith. And his presentation, and again, I'm not knocking anybody here, his presentation was that faith was something that I was going to get from a book or somebody who had faith in the book. What I realized was that my faith was in my individual relationship with God. God, Goddess, Allah, Buddha, Great Spirit, the Great Pumpkin. I don't care what you call it. Okay? But that having an intimate relationship with spirit was something that I would, because when my psychic abilities started really going crazy and people started coming to me and wanting to know things or wanting to talk to me, professional psychic work, but I also had friends. I did my first ghost clearing, I did my first medical intuitive. But every time somebody would come to me and they would say, I own this house and it's haunted and it's driven out 3 tenants and I need to rent it. I would go, can I do this? Do you want me to do this? Okay, yep, I'll do it. So when do you want me to the house? I had no idea how to do a ghost clearing. I had no idea what made somebody a ghost. I had no that stuff. But I had absolute faith that when I got quiet and I asked, can I? And do you want me to? That I didn't have to worry about it. All I just guided. I actually, in my ghost DVD, I actually tell the story of that first ghost clearing, along with a couple of other ghost stories, real life ghost stories from the end. So, faith was not the issue. I didn't have faith in a book. I didn't have faith for somebody whose faith was just in a book. Now, that's a sacred book for them, and I can respect it's sacred for them, but they cannot give me their sacredness. They cannot give me their faith. I went on to get my master's in divinity. Dr. Kevin is a doctorate, my doctorate's in divinity. And the divinity was, in the program I went through was actually that it was the nature of the spirit of man. What moved man's spirit? I didn't study a religion. I didn't study a set of codified ethics and morals and values, 10 commandments or beatitudes or things like this. What I did was, and in fact my doctoral thesis became my first book on ADD, ADHD, managing the gift. Because what my doctoral committee said was, for a doctorate in divinity from this organization, I had to create something that was tangible that I convinced them made the world a better place because of its existence. I needed to prove that I somehow...
Thank you for inviting followers.
My thesis statement was that ADD was part of the evolutionary process, broadening the bandwidth of humanity. It was not a disability, and that we need. That was my doctoral statement, and that was in 2000. And so, and I did a lot of work to do that. But in that, as I'm getting a doctorate, I got my master's I got in my master's program, I actually created a hands-on healing system that I've taught throughout the United States and in a half a dozen countries. That's defined as the process of empowering one to heal oneself. To empower people to understand that they have it within them to be self-healing. And you may need some guidance along the way to get there, but healing simply means to make whole. It is an act and a movement and a step of wholeness. And what it is asking you to do is to step into a greater part of yourself where that which was dis-ease, illness, whether it was emotional or intellectual or physical, has no space in which to live. Now, there are some things that we choose to bring into our life in a lifetime because we want the experience of it. And I'm never going to tell somebody that has cancer or, has, some terminal or degenerative disease that they consciously invited that in. But if they brought it in because it was a series of bad belief systems internally, that led to a set of bad choices, and that they live in a place of self-hatred or self-loathing or lack of belief in self, then they've created the grounds for that to grow in. And so that has to be, just like when you have a wound, sometimes you have to clean it. You have to exercise all of that out so that the wound can heal. The wound will never heal as long as you have, like the glass pieces inside from where your sense of self gets shattered. Does that make sense? So, religion and spirituality. It's been a lifetime path for me. Religions were originally created as a way to give guidance to a much younger version of man. All of the major religions today started in antiquity, when man didn't understand what lightning was, or thunder, or that a shifting weather pattern created a drought. Early man thought that they'd angered the gods, that somehow they were being punished. Early man did lots of sacrifices. If you look into today's major religions, all of them in their earliest incarnations were doing sacrifices of some kind, worshiping something that they were giving their power away as if they were being either constantly assessed and found worthy or unworthy. As man was evolving, man was creating wisdom that was being passed from generation to generation. All religions started as storytellers that were trying to communicate a message. We're trying to pass on wisdom in a way people could take onto it. And those early stories were based on man's ability to understand the world and the world around them. And so there were things that they would say and things that they would do that would make sense, and they were trying to give society a set of laws and rules and ways so society could successfully survive. All of our major world religions in antiquity were a set of how to live life, how to move on, how to keep the species going, how to have peace in the tribe, how to assess things. Whether you're talking Buddhist, Hindu, the Jewish, the Egyptian, the Native American, all of them at the very beginning were just trying to survive and create a successful, cohesive tribe that could survive. And that tribe could survive not only bad weather patterns or locusts or plagues, health issues, but they could survive the attack of other tribes. And they had to be unified. So there had to be a unifying principle. Well, there is nothing more unifying as a principle as having a God that you all worship to. But if you have a god that you all worship to, and that tribe is attacking you, they must have what? A different god. They have to have a different god, or they wouldn't be attacking you. Because if you guys had the same god, you would be living in harmony. You wouldn't be living in fight. As man was trying to come to reason, and early cultures, Egyptian, Babylonian, all, you know, these early cultures, very violent, you know, and very much about power. I mean, the pharaohs weren't running around, you know, like walking down runways in beauty contests with those wonderful headdresses of those, going, hey, don't have a fight. Okay? They got where they got because they ruled with an iron fist, and the ones who didn't got overthrown. You know? And depending on the level of the tribe they came to, the brain started growing more on diets when diets became steady. A malnutrition affects IQ. When tribes came together and they started working and they started having regular meals and they started living a little longer, because their brain capacity increased. And that ability to reason and process, and that which separates us, set up the hierarchy of, well, who created, who went to, you know, at what point did you discover fire? At what point did you discover stone tools? At what point did you discover the mining of ore and the development of metal? At what stage did you realize that you shouldn't drink stagnant water because people got sick? And so there was always this also woven in to the early religions. The whole thing was, you know, this is why so many of the older religions, or most of the religions, have some be fruitful and multiply. Because you could have 10 kids, but 6 of them could die before they were 2. Mortality rates were huge. And so religion gave them answers when their brain did not have that developmental ability to reason out other answers. As man became more successful, as he actually survived, then his religion in some ways grew. But one thing, never shortchange, is man as a creature is the most constructive and destructive creature on earth. And in that, there is always the power struggle. You see power hierarchies in animals. I mean, there is the lion that's the head of the pride. There is the wolf that is the head of the pack. So there are hierarchies, but not with the complexity of man's hierarchy. And it used to be the man that led the tribe was the biggest, rudest man. And then it was the smartest man that could figure out how to get around things. And then it became the most manipulative man, the most charming, that had intelligence and charm and could understand how to not just solve problems for the tribe, but how to manipulate the people in the tribe to make them leader. Now, for a while, certain traits ran true, which is why you ended up with, things like dynasties, and you saw the development of, kings and queens, and that this line is the line that rules. And of course, they always ruled by the order of who? God! All of the aristocracy, noblesse oblige, that they were obligated from the king or the queen, who got their power from God, to take care of the people. And some did. Some actually did do noblesse oblige. A lot of them just made them slaves, just made them servants, just made them because they could. And that power has always been man's greatest driving force. Religion is an institution. Anytime you have an institution, at some point, that institution will stop doing what it was created to do, or will do it as second or third on its list. What will be first on its list will be the survival of the institution. It will outpace the mission statement. It will outpace the vision statement. It will outpace any declaration of God or some higher vision. When something reaches the place where it's an institution, the institution's number one thing, it's like it's become a person in of itself, will be to survive at any cost. So it will hide what it's done that's wrong. It will make excuses. It will shift and do things that are completely out of the mission or vision statement or the commandments of the institution in order to survive. The early emperors after, AD, the early emperors were emperors and popes. They were the emperor and the pope of the known world. They held both crowns. And then at some point that separated. So religion is a place where people who are finding shared ideas or values, this is one reason, come together and say, this is the God that makes sense to me, and I want to be with the people who share that God. However, most religions are going to give you an intermediary between you and that God. A minister, a priest, a set of actions that you need to do for God to communicate with you. Not all religions, but a lot of them, they don't, if they teach you that you can just go out and talk to God sitting in your garden on a Sunday morning, then why would you get up and get dressed and go in and put money in the collection plate, right? Why would you do that? You have to do what saves the institution. It was very popular back in the 1500s. In fact, it was one of the downfalls of the Catholic Church for the Protestant Reformation to happen, was the selling of indulgences. So we would say, so your mother just died. You went to the priest to pray for your mother and to make sure that your mother was in good standings. The priest would say, well, she's at the gate, but she's not going to get in. There's, she's in purgatory, or she's this. But, if you do this and do this and do this, and for this much money, we'll pray and she'll get into heaven. Very popular. Indulgences. Yes, very popular. And we still do it today. I had a psychic that I exposed and shut down that was working down in the Baltimore, D.C. area, who, when she would see she would watch the obituaries, and when she saw certain people with certain family last names, she knew that they were likely to be very religious. And she would call, and she was psychic enough to be able to pick up some information and say, I'm so sorry, your father recently died. I saw, he's been contacting me and he's really struggling. And he asked me to reach out. And there was a woman that I knew that got taken for $40,000 trying to buy her father into heaven. Okay, and that was a decade ago. Indulgences still happen. But part of that is because a lot of religions have kept their membership through an act of fear. We have the golden ticket. And Charlie, you're not going to get into the factory without the golden ticket. You're not going to, pearly gates aren't going to open. You're not going to make it into heaven. God's not going to have anything to do with you. You're going to get punished. This is the way. We have the way. We have the only way. When I first moved out to Virginia, I went by this road, and there was 8 different versions of the Baptist church, and every one of the signs had some reference to why the other 7 were wrong. I said, well, as long as they fight among themselves, I'm okay. Just leave me alone. Okay? And I'm not trying to pick on any one religion. Some religions do it more subtly. That feeling, And I mean, I'm going to pick on my own religion. If I'm going to go to a church, I will most likely, though I actually got very attached to a church out in Phoenix that was not Unitarian Universalism, it was Science of Mind, which I tend to like, but in Unitarian Universalism, I mean, there is that hey, you were born with this intelligence and these gifts and stuff like this, and you kind of owe it to the world to do something with it. There can be some subtle manipulation there. It isn't you're not going to go to heaven, but it's about, what kind of good person are you going to be? In Eastern religions, and especially people who don't understand what karma is, which drives me crazy, because 99 out of 100 people that I talk to about karma have no idea what it is, and all they've done is they've stamped a Western perspective on it. Like, what's your karma? Like, instead of saying, if you steal from my store, you're going to go to hell. As long as I'm involved with the store, you will never see a sign up here that says, beware your karma. Because that tells me that the owner does have no clue what karma is if they have that sign on their wall. Because that's not what karma is. That's a whole different story. But, we westernize everything we touch. We twist everything that we touch. So religion can be good if you find a religion that feels like it creates a camaraderie. It is inclusive, not exclusive. I was recently talking to a woman who belongs to a church, and she came to talk to me because, I've known her for a long time, and she came to talk to me because she was on one of those, what I call moving into, if not into, what I would call the nutcase religions. And the minister completely understood why she wanted to divorce her husband, had met with both of them, completely got that this was an abusive situation for her to be in, completely got that she needed to get out. When he was talking to her, when he was talking to the two of them, it was all about, well, but God would want you to stay and work this out. And she actually said, well, if I move forward with this, will I be welcome at the church? Well, I don't think you'd be comfortable. And then the minister went out and informed the church that this woman was struggling and was thinking of leaving her husband and asked people to pray for her and give her support. She didn't announce it to her church. Her minister did. And then she got all these people saying, oh no, you got to work,
How do you know who I am?
No, you're not going to end up at the table of heaven if you get divorced. You're not going to end up at Jesus' table. This kind of manipulation. Are all religions bad? No. I love Unitarian Universalism. I love science of mind. But if you're going to look at a religion, remember, religions are institutions. They are there to give you a guiding set of principles to live by. And you have to feel that's where you belong. Not because your parents belong there. Not because you don't feel like you belong anywhere else. And sometimes I find that oftentimes that religion plays off the fact that so many people have shattered self-worth and self-esteem. Especially where a lot of our religions today at one point said, really, you were born in sin heaven. Really? Really? Doesn't work. Not for me. Maybe it works for you. That's what you get to decide. Spirituality is that spirit of man. What moves man's spirit? What makes you feel like you are connected to something that is larger than you? What makes you feel?
The guy speaking is my cousin.
We must be coming up to as much time as we can capture. And then I'm going to close this out with talking more now about spirituality.